You're listening to the new media. You're listening to Mitchell Talks. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter at MitchellTalks.
Episode 3 of the News9 sessions with Grant Hermes and Aaron Brilbeck. And I have to tell you, the thing that popped up this week has been 788. Can I give you an operating thesis this morning?
788 being the legalization of medical marijuana.
Marijuana.
Yeah, what's your theory?
That if the campaign is about medical marijuana, the antis lose. If the campaign is about 788, the antis could win.
Elaborate.
All right. Whether or not a person's for medical marijuana is uniquely personal, correct? But this is a state question with a certain type of design that people say is unworkable. So if the antis focus on just the idea of medical marijuana, we've moved on from that. People are for that.
Right.
But if the antis are going to defeat it, they're going to have to say, you can be for medical marijuana, but this deal is not about medical.
Bad deal.
It's a bad deal.
Gotcha.
Your thoughts?
I would tend to agree with that. I just had a very long conversation with Sheriff Chris West over in Canadian County, and they just had a real large bust out there. And almost every week he sends us a different press release in terms of another large drug bust. And it used to be, hey, we got some heroin. Hey, we got some meth. Now, every single time, it's pot. And his people are telling me that they can't even go after the other drugs anymore because so many people are bringing in marijuana from states where it's legal. Your Californias, your Colorados, and states where it's grown medicinally, and people will grow a little bit too much and then pass it out the back door, and then that stuff makes its way to Oklahoma. So in talking with Chris, he says, yeah, his concern is not medical marijuana. He says his concern is 788 and the way that 788 is written, which he says is basically just, pardon the pun, a gateway to opening up for recreational marijuana, not just for medicinal marijuana. And I don't necessarily disagree.
Well, that's the way it's written, right? That's the intent here. That's the model that's been used in other states as well. They've let in medical marijuana, the way that it's structured within the state. Even when the legislature was immediately involved, we'll get to that in a second probably, that should this pass, the legislature will have to come back for another special session. They may not. But the idea in other states has been that make these protocols so lax that in 3 to 5 years they come back and say, well, people are just using it anyway. They go to any doctor they're friends with and they get the script and they go to the dispensary right afterwards. Let's just make it recreational. It's the step and the stepping stone to recreational marijuana. We've seen it in most of those other states.
Right. And you're absolutely right. And that's the way that it appears to be written. And it's crafted by those that are backers of recreational marijuana. And you're right. It's the whole, I don't want to sound cliche, but it's that whole slippery slope deal.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, and then the other thing too is that, is the legislature going to come back? Should this pass? Sooner polls got it at, I think, 57.5% in favor in their last poll, which is a 4-point drop from January. It was at 61%. That could just be some sorting out.
Sure.
By the end, that's also just outside the margin of error at like 4.8. So it's the weeds, I know. But if this passes...
No pun intended.
You're welcome.
Nice.
You're all welcome for that. You're very welcome. So many puns.
It's a joint effort.
Oh, yes.
We have to keep on going.
All right. So if the legislature comes
turn
back...
this into a drinking game, by the way. They do the weather game. Anytime that there's a pot reference in this deal, take a shot.
No, we'd never make it through the show.
Not even close.
So if they come back in January, are they going to have the resource, or in July, not January, sorry, they come back in July, are they going to have the resources to put together a framework that is going to make everyone happy, or is it going to be some shell of what we probably should have?
Yeah, the short answer to that is shell. The health department, which, as we know, has had more than its fair share of problems between losing money, finding money, losing money again, laying off a bunch of people unnecessarily. They've got more problems than they can clearly handle. And they've already said there is no way that we're equipped to do this. So if this thing, if 788 does pass, the health department is going to have to very, very suddenly and quickly get it together and do essentially what the feds are doing right now with all drug regulation, is in terms of knowing how to get the marijuana grown properly, grown in such a way that it's not exposed to mold and to pesticides, and they've got to suddenly become experts in marijuana growth and regulation, and they're nowhere near that right now.
Well, wouldn't that mean then things would have to fall under, the State Med Board, the Department of Health, the Department of Human Services, mental health and substance abuse, ag and commerce?
All of the above, and taxation. And my suspicion is what the legislature would probably wind up doing is creating a new separate bureaucracy altogether to handle all of that. But again, you're talking about doing something. It's a huge task that we're just not ready to do. And these are people that can't agree on what to have for lunch, let alone what to do in terms of medical marijuana. I don't see it happening. Not well, anyhow.
Can you help us understand what happened legislatively? I know Representative Jordan was trying to put together some preemptive language to tighten it up. I don't understand how that works. But that happened in the House, but the Senate didn't take it up. Is that my recollection?
That was
correct?
That was the way that it went down. And Irvin Yen, also on the Senate side, tried to put together some preemptive stuff. And the argument against it simply was that it's difficult for us to put together any preemptive rules without having the law in place. And would it be constitutional to start passing rules on something that the people haven't even voted on yet? And I think that much of the legislature was leery about doing that. And understand, too, this is right now, or at least back then it was. It's not as popular now, but that was, at the time, a very popular thing, getting medical marijuana passed. Most people are behind getting medical marijuana passed if it's done properly in the state of Oklahoma. So again, you're going into an election season. Do you want to be seen as somebody who is trying to prevent my dying grandmother from receiving some kind of relief? No, of course you don't. So I think a lot of them were very leery about even touching it. Had this not been an election season, I think we would have seen a lot of things going differently this year. But it's an election year, man.
Now, all that being said, there are models to follow in states, because it looks like we're going to be on this track. If it doesn't pass this year, it'll pass the next year after that. There are models to follow, whether it's Colorado, whether it's Oregon, whether it's there's an East Coast state that I'm blanking on right now. But whether it's another state's model, we'll probably use Colorado because we touch them, and that would make interstate commerce probably a little easier, if that's a thing that would end up happening. So I wouldn't see it out of the realm of possibility that if they come back in the summer, we wouldn't just adopt those models.
I don't know. I think that we probably wouldn't. I'll tell you why. Oklahomans are still very conservative. And, I mean, look at our alcohol laws, for example, and the battle that we had to pass those. The argument is going to be, do we want to be what Denver is?
I don't know. Denver and I don't think Colorado, they don't have the same boogeyman-ness to Oklahoma conservatives that California does. I don't know.
That's another example. Do we want to be another California? I think that's what's going to be looming over the head of a lot of conservative voters in Oklahoma is, do we want to model something that's going on in a place like California?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know what the deal would be, but obviously this is going to happen whether people like it or not, Unless they regulate it to the point where it's not. And that could be a case. We just don't know, which is kind of back to the original question here, that this question is worded in a way that raises all these other questions.
That leaves it wide open.
Right.
And again, I think that's probably the reason that they didn't want to pass a whole lot of legislation leading up to this, because they were afraid of how they'd be perceived on Election Day. But you're right. They're going to have to take this up before Election Day, not before primaries, but before Election Day. This is something that's going to have to be discussed. And I think there's a lot of people that are at the legislature that are afraid of that.
This could be a thing that really shapes up to be a real issue come actual election season. So we'll know after the primaries who the candidates are and what happens with this state question. And
I think you're going to see it come down like a speeding freight train. The reason being, everybody was so focused on education and the budget leading up to this, that now that that's, at least in theory, taken care of, now we can tackle this issue of medical marijuana, which I think is going to be a huge issue.
Do the parties have platforms? Do they have plans for this? I haven't seen anything out of either major party about how they would operate this under a...
I haven't seen anything,
Me
and
either.
I think by and large it's been backburnered because our focus has been education, teachers, pay raise. And now that that's behind us, it's going to be like being hit in the face with a frying pan.
Almost behind us.
Or a pot.
Have you heard from a party anyway?
I have not.
Could the two parties in Oklahoma be any less relevant than they are now?
No, I don't think so. I mean, and not at least as far as party, apparatus go. I don't. They're so silent.
Within their own parties, I think they're extremely relevant. But the average Oklahoman, no, not really.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
A colleague of yours, I now see promotions running on News9, Amanda Taylor, has gone to Colorado, right? And there's a series upcoming about medical marijuana, or is it full-blown marijuana in Colorado? It
was more about, it aired last night, so we're recording this on Friday. It aired on Thursday. It's already up on the app and the website. It's a good story. It's worth the watch. It's more about the overall industry and how that works, and how if Oklahoma did what Colorado did, we'd have to build it from the ground up.
So since you mentioned it, take a listen.
In less than a month, voters will go to the polls to decide if Oklahoma should become the 30th state to legalize medical marijuana.
In Colorado, that vote happened almost 2 decades ago, and the process they've gone through could provide a window into Oklahoma's future.
So we paid a visit and found out it could be a very complicated journey. With production capabilities of 3.5 tons of dried marijuana buds a year,
money does grow on trees.
Medicine Man is not only one of the biggest players in a billion-dollar industry, it's also a consulting operation.
Had a group from Oklahoma today, yep.
Medical marijuana has been legal in Colorado since 2000. Over the years, the state has refined its procedures and now serves as a nationwide model, not just for people trying to get into the industry, but also for those who will regulate it.
We've had senators, we've had state representatives come in, we've had governors come through.
What they find at Medicine Man is a painstaking process where plants are tracked every step of the way, from seedlings to the first transplant and on into the primary grow house.
We're just simulating Mother Nature.
Every plant carries a tag required by the state of Colorado that marks its individual progress with a radio frequency.
They're about 45 cents a tag, so it's a whole separate revenue stream to the state.
The tag follows the plants from the budding room.
They'll stay in here for 10 weeks.
To where they're harvested, dried, and cured.
But this is the way the state will always know how much inventory we have, where specific plants are located, and where they're moving.
Tracking the plants is just the beginning. All of this product has to be tested before it goes to production facilities and then ready for sale. And because federal law prohibits marijuana from crossing state lines, every aspect of it has to stay right here in Oklahoma, something critics say voters need to carefully consider.
So if you legalize it at a state level, you have to recreate a Food and Drug Administration. You have to recreate the testing. You have to recreate the safety parameters.
The group Smart Colorado works to keep marijuana out of the hands of minors and tries to educate other states about the marijuana industry.
The state has to be prepared to create an entire drug industry, right, from scratch, because the federal government is not doing that.
In Colorado, that drug industry has created thousands of jobs and millions of dollars in tax revenue.
They've used that for, the fire department, infrastructure, police, schools. It's been very good for the state.
But getting to that point isn't easy.
Lawmakers can make or break any state program, and I've seen it happen.
Now, Medicine Man Technologies tells us last year medical and recreational marijuana sales in Colorado came to about $1.2 billion.
Okay, so that was Amanda Taylor. Isn't it amazing what we can do in editing? I will tell you that years ago when we were dual citizens of Oklahoma and New Mexico, my wife Candace went into a little town called San Luis because they started with medical marijuana first in Colorado, and it wasn't hard to get. And she had her and my daughter went for a dinner or something just across the border, and they were lamenting how that with the medical aspect of it, how bad it was, that it just ruined the town. People were hanging around because the dispensaries were well known. You didn't have to, tennis elbow, and you could go in there and get them where docs set things up. So that's interesting. We'll see what happens over the next few weeks, and would invite you to go to the Mitchell Talks page for the special tab on 788. Not that we would exploit an issue like that for ratings, but no, not at all. sort of thing.
But I think, all jokes aside, it's going to get real serious real quick, and you want to bone up on it.
Absolutely. So you've got the nose.
There's another pun in there, too, bone. Thanks.
By the way, as we tape this, and by the time you hear this, it'll be over, but something was going on. How do you talk about something in the past when it's in the future? It's
odd. Like we're in a time machine.
Yeah, what is this?
So as we sit here right now, and right now is behind us now. That was starting to sound like Andrew Griffin when Andrew's into time travel. I think. Anyway, the point is there was a big convention that happened last week, and as we're taping this, it's in front of us. But tell us what you're hearing about the big convention dealing with cannabis in Oklahoma City.
Right. It's the very first Mid-America Medical Cannabis Convention and Expo. It's a snappy title.
Wait, what is it again?
Yeah, right. Mid-America Medical Cannabis Convention and Expo. So it's 2 days long. It would have been June 1st and 2nd here. And full of experts, vendors, and supporters. I'm sure the 788 people were crawling all over the place. They don't specifically talk about State Question 788 at all, but the timing of it can't be ignored. That this thing is here. It's a massive event at the Bennett Event Center at the State Fair Park.
Not a coincidence.
Not at all. No chance. But it is an interesting shift that it would be here.
Well, I think that the reason for that is we're on the cliff right now. A lot of states are watching what we're going to be doing in the next few weeks and few months, and how the legislature responds to it. Oklahoma is definitely one of the reddest states in the country. If Oklahoma, as a red state, goes green, that's going to open the doors for a lot of other states.
Do we also then, if we don't, do we become the model for the states who abandon, marijuana reform? I don't know what the overall issue is called, really, but do we, in the way that Kansas became the model for how to cut state spending, and that did not end well for Kansas, but they were the test lab for that. Does Oklahoma become the no to marijuana test lab if this doesn't pass?
I think it's very possible. I think it's very possible. And I don't know what the ramifications of that'll be, but as you know, things can be spun in any direction. And I could see it being spun as we're a bunch of backwood hicks who don't care about grandma dying of cancer. And I'd hate to see that happen. But like we've talked about too, anything anything like medical marijuana, it has to be regulated. And if you're not going to regulate it, and if you're just going to make it recreational, then make it recreational and tax the bejesus out of it.
Well, that's going to be fun. And remind you, we'll be talking about this right up to the primary. Is that the biggest issue, the biggest draw for people for the primary, besides the governor's race and the attorney general's race? That's it, right? That's the three big ball games? Yeah,
and I think the average, Grant and I were talking about this earlier, the average person doesn't really care about the attorney general's race. The only reason that it's become interesting is because there's been so much mudslung during it. It's gotten nasty, and people like seeing a good scrap. But outside of that, it's right up there with dog catcher. Nobody really cares about it. But is 788 going to bring a lot more people to the polls? I think absolutely. There's a reason that it's being taken up now during the primaries as opposed to during the general election. If it's taken up during the general election, you're going to see a lot more Democratic backers coming out. And by the way, they're also going to vote for more Democrats as long as they're in the booth anyhow. And the Republicans, especially the governor, certainly don't want to see that happen. That's why I think you're seeing it on the primary. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree with that. That's absolutely why it's being done during this season and not in November, and why they want to make it a fight moving into November, because Republicans can then turn out their base to combat Democrats that are normally better at getting out to the polls in a normal election period.
Yeah, it's a great big chess game. It really is. And these guys they're always looking 15 moves ahead. And a lot of them are looking more towards their political careers than 788. But we'll use 788, and if it's going to be coming out anyhow, let's make sure that we've got some kind of control over it.
So what you're saying is this a point we can agree on, that Democrat voters tend to be a little bit more accepting of medical marijuana than Republican primary voters?
I think marijuana in general, not necessarily medical marijuana. I think a lot of even your most staunch conservative Republicans, nobody wants grandma to be suffering. So in terms of medical marijuana done as medical marijuana only, and controlled, I think that you'll see a lot of Republican support for that. But the way that it's written right now, as Grant pointed out, it's written very, very vague. And I think that the more that conservatives and Republicans look into that, the more they're going to say, oh, wait a second, this is not something that I want to back.
Right. And it's the fact that Republicans, when we talk about marijuana or medical marijuana, often run into an ideological problem, a fork in the road between the idea of, in this case, government efficiency and overall law and order as a tentpole issue of the party, and then seeing, reported benefits of medical marijuana. And Democrats just don't have that problem. Very against the war on drugs, pro-pot, have always been. Most of the states that first adopted medical marijuana and then recreational marijuana have been strong blue states. They just don't have the same ideological barriers or decisions to make.
Can you tell us some of the names of some of the pro 788s that will become household names or could become household names? Media doesn't get into the people behind the scenes very well. And we've talked, McFerrin's behind the nose, Pat McFerrin, who knows exactly what he's doing. And we know exactly where they're going to go. It's going to be an issue on debating on the state question, not the general philosophy of medical marijuana. But who are the yays? Some of the folks that will be ubiquitous before the campaign's over.
Within the legislature?
Within just advocates for.
I was going to say, within the legislature, that's honestly kind of tough to nail down, because what they're saying in public for votes and what they're saying in private for votes is probably two different things, much like the gun debate, the constitutional carry debate. Those that we know that are definitely vehemently opposed to it within the legislature, Irvin Yen would be tops on that list. Dr. Yen is a doctor. He knows medicine, and he's got some serious concerns, obviously. Not so much about medical marijuana, but again, about the way that this is written. So I think he would probably be tops on the list.
I saw a news HBO film the other night about John McCain. If you haven't seen it, it's really awesome. It's about it. And it's also strange because it's like a prologue to his death. And it went back to South Carolina back in 2000, where he kept being asked about the flag, and he said, I think it should be a local thing. Later, he said, look, I broke my pledge to you to always tell you the truth. He said that was not the truth. I was afraid if I came right out and said, I think the Confederate battle flag causes great trauma within the African American community, and I should have said it. He goes, but I was afraid I was going to lose votes in South Carolina. So I'm wondering if what you just alluded to, take that metaphor and apply it to people are being very careful. Dr. Yen, Senator Yen will be out front, but do you think there's a lot of people out there that maybe on the Republican side who might just come out and go, yeah, I'm for medical marijuana, and being for it, I'm just against this, and separating the two issues, some intellectual honesty. Are we ready for that?
I think that's exactly what we're going to see. I think that everybody is waiting to see what everybody else is going to do first. Who's going to be the first one, besides Irvin Yen, who's going to be the first one to really pull the trigger and say, hey, I'm all about it, but this bill, the way that it's written, is garbage.
Well, and not to beat a dead horse here, but that's the thing, is that what they haven't done yet is taken what we saw this year among the sessions and inefficiencies in government and financial troubles, scandals in government here.
That's being very polite.
And it is polite. But and taking those things that we've just watched all year and then using them to talk about 788 as a state question and not as the issue of medical marijuana. And no one has done that yet. And if they don't, and they're running out of time, they may not be able to pick that mantle back up.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of discussion going on right now at the Capitol about 788 and how they're going to present it. Just because these guys are on break, it doesn't mean they're not working. We know that. There's a lot of stuff going on behind closed doors, especially with leadership. But I've got to wonder if they've got enough time to put together the infrastructure for something as huge as this. And honestly, I've got to question whether a lot of them understand just how huge a task this is going to be. The health department obviously gets it. they've already started waving the white flag and said, we can't do it. We don't have the resources. We can't make it happen. Which leads me to believe that the legislature is going to have to create a different level of bureaucracy for it. What that's going to look like really is anyone's guess. And I'm sure that there are going to be bills that are passed or discussions that are had that may be unconstitutional. So there will be constitutional challenges to whatever they do. We've kind of, I think, unanimously agreed that it's going to be July that they get together again if this thing passes in June. But there will be constitutional challenges to it. And implementing this thing is going to be very difficult.
Should leadership be talking to you guys on a regular basis during the interim? You just mentioned there is a lot going on behind the scenes, but so I'm already showing my color of my slip on this. They're not on a regular basis letting people know what's going on in the interim, and there's a heck of a lot of work out there.
There is, and they're not. And honestly, I mean, with the legislature not in session, we're probably not beating them up as much as we normally do, and probably should be beating them up. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of back and forth communication right now, and there probably should be more, because that's a good question. The question is, what is this infrastructure going to look like in terms of regulating medical marijuana should it pass?
I'm not even sure if there's a lot of talking going on with leadership. They take this time to regroup, to figure out where everyone else in their leadership stands, where everyone else in their party and caucuses stand. They're not good at talking to media. They're just not. They're not even during the session. They're not great about talking to media. But I'm not sure they'd have anything to say right now if we were able to corner them and ask.
And Charles McCall, for example, has not been very good about communicating with the media. Period. He sends John Eccles out to do most of his talking. I can count on one hand how many times we've interviewed McCall in the past year. And he started off strong, and then he just kind of petered out. On the other side, Schultz, who's still in leadership on the Senate side, has been very good about talking with the media. Greg Treat is going to be taking over for him. Greg, over the past year, has gotten very good in front of the camera. He's very comfortable in front of the camera, works well with the media. But they're not the ones that control the purse strings on the Senate side. It's the House that does that. And we're just not getting the communication, I think, that we would like to see from the House. But again, we should probably, and I take full blame for this too, the media should be hammering these guys a lot more on 788 right now. What's the plan should this thing pass?
Would they be a big player, a big influencer, because we've talked about this the last couple of weeks, if leadership in both houses, both chambers, were to suddenly get very active in terms of talking about the issues like 788, would they be influential on people? Or is their approval rating just so low that's
how I was going to answer it. I think their approval rating right now is just slightly lower than that of colon cancer. I don't know if they're going to have an influence one way or another on it. I think that most people have made up their mind on 788, and many of those people that have made up their minds haven't read 788 to know exactly what it is. But they know, yes, I'm in favor of medical marijuana, or yes, I'm opposed to medical marijuana, or yes, I don't want us to be a state full of hotheads. They've pretty much made up their minds. And with the legislature seeing the distrust that it has right now, I don't know how much of an influence they're going to have. I mean, nobody's going to say, for example, yeah, I'm all for grandma getting pot, but well, my legislator says it's a bad idea, so forget it. I can't see that happening.
Let me shift for just a moment to teachers. There's a lot of candidate forums. Have you guys seen any of those? I mean, I think they're going on all over the place, the state. But there was a big move this week on the OK Taxpayers Unite. The Attorney General has weighed in on that. How does that impact what's about to happen? Isn't June 11th when the Supremes are going to be looking at it?
Yeah. I mean, Hunter essentially muddies the waters with this, and I'll explain that here, is that Hunter, in his response to an invitation to have a response from the Supreme Court, they asked him to write a piece up. He said he has no qualms about the way voters should decide here. His thing is that the challenges to the original petition, there's a pair of challenges, should be tossed out, and the court should let this get to the voters, because the court shouldn't be in the business of stopping these kinds of ballot initiatives before they make it there. He's probably on solid legal ground to make that argument. There's a question that I'll get to in a second about the way the actual law is worded. But it muddies the waters. People are confused about which challenge we're talking about to which petition and which one is he talking about and what does this mean for teacher pay. The whole thing just becomes this fog. And come June 11th, it'll maybe get a little more clear, maybe not, depending on what the Supreme Court says. But by the time we get to the election, I think this is going to be such a quagmire for voters that it might be hard to predict what's going to happen.
I think you hit it right on the head. And in terms of the way that Hunter's response was worded, it is a little bit muddy. What he is saying essentially is that should this pass, that it won't have any impact on teacher pay. What he means is legally it won't have any impact on teacher pay. In terms of where we come up with the money, that's a totally different issue. But I think it was a bold move on his behalf. It showed his commitment more to the Constitution as opposed to politics. And I think it was a bold move.
Even though I didn't understand, I mean, I've read it several times. I did the story yesterday. I don't understand the argument that it won't affect teacher pay. If this passes, it repeals the taxes that fund the teacher pay raises. Therefore, it prevents teacher pay raises. So, to say, I found that part a little disingenuous while reading it. That to say it won't affect teacher pay legally, financially is a different thing, is a little like splitting hairs, but then again, that's kind of what he was asked to do.
Yeah, and again, I think that in my reading of it, my interpretation of what his response was is that it doesn't impact the fact that the teacher pay raises have to go through, but it doesn't address the funding mechanism for them.
Right.
That's where we're going to be facing the problem, is that he's saying that, yes, according to this, the teacher raises still should go through, but it's up to the legislature and the school districts to figure out exactly how to pay the bill.
Right.
You're telling me that, I think you prefaced this, he didn't have a choice. He weighed into this because he had to weigh into it, correct?
He was invited to weigh in, and normally attorneys general do weigh in on these things when it's a massive question like this.
And so everything's viewed right now in the prism of politics and the campaign riots. So this was something this wasn't an attempt to get some ink or some attention by the attorney general.
I don't see it as such.
I don't think so either. It didn't read that way. The way that it was announced it didn't happen that way. He didn't call a press conference for that or anything.
And so what I read a couple of headlines. I still see some of the print headlines. It's fewer and fewer all the time, but it was Attorney General sides with the Unite Oklahoma or Oklahoma Taxpayers Unite,
which is also
pretty damaging in a political standpoint.
Yes,
right?
Which is essentially also what our headline was too, is along those lines, that he does effectively side, saying that these challenges shouldn't be here for this, because what happens if the petition passes and has nothing to do legally with teacher pay raises.
So you think it's solid legal reasoning?
Yeah, like logically, if you walk through it step by step, it makes sense. It does make sense. Except for the part where he says it's not going to affect teacher pay raises, because it obviously is about that.
It is going to do that. The solid legal reasoning, I'm thinking about Jeff Beauregard Sessions, who did what he had to do and recused. He didn't have any choice. He's just getting the crap beat out of him, So I wondered how this politica was going to play out. Also, that accountability group finally got together. I think that'll be a campaign issue as they go down the road. Something for their leadership. They can say, look, we're addressing the waste. Some people took a shot at the commission saying, well, this is all private sector people. But is it another commission that nobody will cover and nobody cares about, or could it be impactful?
That's a really good question. I think there's potential for it to be impactful. It's just this is, uncharted waters kind of a deal. It's really hard to say.
I think it's us throwing $2 million at a group that is going to be about as effective as the Ethics Commission or, frankly, recently the Auditor's Office. It's just another line of these groups that are going to be an end run around for agencies and for partisans, no matter who's in power, because if, 7 years down the road or the next election in 2020, if we become a fully Democratic controlled state, they're going to get to a point, the 9 people on this commission. It's an end run around certain elements of the government. I also found it interesting that Republicans would create this because it does add another layer of bureaucracy to the government. which is sort of another ideological split.
Right, but at the same time, it's all about perception, man. And by creating this thing, they're saying, hey, we're doing something. And for people who aren't really looking too deeply into it, it looks like they're doing something. And like you said, the effectiveness of it, I mean, they've got no real power. At best, they can make suggestions that people can ignore, and that's $2 million out the window. And you're right, and I don't want to sound cynical, but you're absolutely right. But perception is reality in the world of politics. And if it's perceived that they're trying to do something about these issues that we've been facing, that's a vote.
I tend to think without some actual teeth to this commission, which they can do, the legislature can put this in. They can call for it. The members of this commission can call for more teeth. Is just going to be a thing that 2 years from now we're going to get calls from viewers being like, "What happened to this group? What happened?" Like, it just in the way that they will Facebook message us now and be like, "How come the Oklahoma Ethics Commission can't do what it feels like they should be able to do?"
Or Gary Jones' office, like
exactly,
you said. Right.
Exactly.
Speaking of bureaucrats, are there any potential superstar bureaucrats? Stay with me on this one. We've talked about how that state government, the legislature, and you noted Treat is getting more and more comfortable behind the mic, and Eccles is on every week with me. But amongst bureaucracy, it doesn't seem that there's anybody that really stands out as being a number one communicators. If I'm a bureaucrat and I'm under the gun, I would like for people to know what I'm doing and how wonderful everything is. Is there something in our Oklahoma DNA, some sort of substandard that makes people fear messaging? We ain't got that much media, okay? And they can make relationships with you guys. I mean, you can have conversations with people that go beyond just the soundbite. I think about the high-profile agencies. I don't know what good. When you're talking about DHS, all their stories are bad because they're dealing with human misery, right? And highways are dealing with potholes, like I-35 around Memorial Road. I don't know what they're doing out there. I thought perhaps maybe that testing new chug holes. But there are just so many things out there that are going on that doesn't seem like bureaucracy. And they've all got PR people. Hell, they got giant staffs. How many PR people are in state government? A ton load. You called it last week, you called it a metric ton?
Metric poop load.
Metric poop load. Anybody on the horizon out there that might want to start communicating on a 2018 level that would help us understand government?
Joe Albaugh. I think he'll continue to be good from DOC. His office, no matter who has been there, I mean, since I've been here, they've had, I think, 3 different PR folks over there, and they've all been good about getting him in front of reporters to talk about the issues in his department. I think the new head of the health department, his name I'm forgetting right now. Tom Bates. Yep. He did a very good interview with you.
Yep.
And I think that probably will continue as the health department tries to rehab itself here. Same thing, speaking of rehab, with mental health and substance abuse. They have a good shop over there, and I think they'll continue to be good, especially if 788, does one way or the other here.
Yeah, I would add, you're absolutely right on every single one of those accounts. And I think that by and large, the media has done a lousy job over the past 20, 25 years or better here in Oklahoma of working with these agencies. And as a result, now that we're trying to form these relationships, I think a lot of these agencies and a lot of the politicians are just very leery of being on air and of saying something stupid that they think we're going to capitalize on. And I think that's part of the problem. That's something that we'd really need to kind of work through.
I also think part of the problem is poor media training. A lot of the folks in the PR shops are former television reporters. Terry Angier over at ODOT, I'm fairly certain who worked for, I think, K4 for a little while. And she's good over there, but a lot of the people, especially up at the Capitol, just do not get an adequate amount of media training to feel comfortable in front of reporters, in front of the camera, and to not feel like they're going to stumble over their own teeth trying to get their words out.
And for many of them, I think that, and I don't want to name names because I have to work with these guys every day, but for many of them, they take the attitude that we're not here to facilitate a meeting between the media and the person. We're here to serve as a bodyguard to prevent the media from talking to this person. And all of us have run into that on multiple occasions. I've had PR person for a very high-level politician stand in my way on a staircase to prevent me from talking with that person. It seems a little bit, it's a little over the top, but it's born out of fear. And a lot of that has to do with the way that the press has been with a lot of these folks in the past. And we need to start working on forming those relationships and building those relationships better. But it's something that's going to take time.
So for our last segment, let's do a little media training for these folks that are screwing stuff up, which I see the same thing. My first tip would be, don't put out press releases after 5 o'clock on Friday. We've gotten into that.
Man. Amen.
We've mentioned that once or twice, I think, yeah.
Good grief. After all of this time, the stuff still goes on. It's just a kick me sign. We'll start with you, Grant. Tell people that, and I agree with everything you guys have said, there are a jillion of these people out there trying to do their jobs. I understand that, but they do. I think in general, if you were given state government bureaucracy media relations grades, let me start with that. What would you give them on an A to F scale, Aaron?
When I first got here, I would have given them an F. Right now, I think that it's getting better. I would say a C+, honestly.
Yeah, I'd say a solid, I think B-, maybe, for the folks that I talk to. You obviously deal with a lot more people up at the Capitol who have a lot less media training or a lot more leery of the media.
Well, that's a pretty good jump, by the way. Who leads the pack? Put you on the spot. You mentioned Allball, which I know. I mean, he's got a problem. He tells the truth.
Right.
He's very frank. But that would mean some folks are learning. That's actually some sunshine there. And
I'm seeing that with leadership in both the House and the Senate. Even though, again, as we talked about, McCall doesn't get in front of the cameras anymore. Eccles does. Eccles is incredibly accessible. He's happy to talk with the media because he understands that we're doing the story with or without you. If you want to control the narrative, you better go on TV. You better talk with us. Otherwise, you're probably going to get beat up, and you're going to be instead of spending 5 minutes talking with me today, you're going to be spending the next 3 days answering phone calls from angry constituents. How do you want to play this?
If you're explaining, you're losing.
Right.
And that's how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, up at the Capitol, I think Dunnington does a good job.
I agree.
On the camera. So does Virgin.
Mm-hmm.
Both younger members up there too, so they kind of get it a little more. But if you want to go back to the tips of what to do, I mean, know that the Oklahoma media is not the national media. There aren't very many axes to grind when it comes to state media, and a lot of times we're just trying to get up to speed with what's happening in places that we're not allowed because we're not members of the government at all. So that's just one of my biggest things. That and call us back or email us. All of our cell phones are attached to the emails and the phone calls that we send out. We know you see them because we see all of the emails that we get all day long. Just a response back is helpful.
And for the legislature that has exempted itself from open records, pass a bill, run a bill, and pass a bill saying that you're not better than anybody else, and you will now do what everybody else does in government, and you will share public records with the public. That to me is my biggest pet peeve.
It's huge. That's a huge one. I mean, trying to understand, not even like when there's a scandal. I had to try to figure that out when the Kirby sexual harassment stuff came down. But just trying to understand the history of the legislature as the way it was run when folks were there is impossible unless you have somebody inside that will leak you like spreadsheets. So yes, absolutely pass an Open Records Act for the State House.
If you truly want to be perceived as transparent, get rid of this stupid law. It's a stupid law, period.
Well, I think it's a good way to end. Anything you're looking forward to this coming week?
The weekend.
The weekend. Yeah.
Grant Hermes, people find you by doing what?
Find me on Twitter. It's at Grant Hermes KWTV. On Facebook, search the same thing. I'm also on Instagram at Grant Hermes TV. That is just filled with desk doodles that I do during the 4 a.m. show, but it's fun.
With me, I'm an old guy, so I'm more Facebook than anything else. You want to reach me, reach out to me on Facebook.
Thank you both. Talk to you next week.
You're listening to the new media, the Mitchell Talks Network. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter at MitchellTalks.